Welcome to Take It EV, episode 6.
I am back. Thanks for putting up without me.
That's all right.
I think at this point I'm more of a frequent guest than a co-host, but either way, I'm glad you haven't let my absence stop you from doing more episodes.
Well, I do have an issue with punctuality, I have to admit.
So, funny enough, around the time that you were ranting about hybrids in episode 4, which was a great rant, by the way, I was actually buying a hybrid. Well, a plug-in one anyway. I'm going to tell you about that in a little bit. But first, I think you've got some follow-up to do, haven't you?
Yeah, so when I was talking to Gavin, I was super tired. Imagine he's in New Zealand, I'm in London, or New London anyway, in England. So I've been recording at 9 p.m. after a very busy day. And he was just up and, I was his first engagement of the day. So he was, young and shining, and I was tired and just so I've made a few mistakes, apart from a slurry voice, which is always the case with me. I speak too fast. I said something about a trip to Edinburgh, which apparently was 700 miles. And some people have corrected me that from Tunbridge to Edinburgh is about 400-ish miles. Apologies for that. It still takes an awful long time to drive, even in the regular car. So that doesn't matter. That's pretty much all the follow-up I have.
Yeah, I think that's still beyond the range of any pure EV, isn't it? So that's the main thing.
I think the Tesla Roadster is the new one. Is supposed to be close to that. If you hypermile it, but good luck sitting in a car for 10 hours without having a break.
That does remind me of my first trip in my Leaf, but that's a story for another time.
But you did stop, right?
Oh yeah,
exactly. That's what I mean. Like with it's supposed to have a 600-mile range. So if you hypermile it, I think 700 is achievable.
Okay.
But that would take an awful long time.
Getting like a $25,000 car. That's something we could do, but it's probably, if we really work really hard, I think maybe we could do that in 3 years.
There's not many EVs right now that can do that at all, regardless of how you drive. Most of the ones in my price range, at least, are significantly smaller range, and in fact, that sort of leads nicely into my story. So we have two cars. We bought the Nissan Leaf a few years ago now, on the basis that it would be our second car, so we can do all our local journeys with a pure EV. But then we still had a dirty diesel for the longer journeys and for those times we need a bigger car as well. In fact, it was a 7-seater, say a Ford S-Max. We actually bought it new, but 8.5 years ago, so it was starting to get a bit old as well. And never felt that comfortable about it. In fact, after we got the Leaf, it felt like a bit of an animal driving it. It was definitely a big step back, especially when we had to take it into a petrol station. So looking forward to the day we can replace it. And beginning of this year, realised that time was coming. It was starting to develop those sort of problems that cars of a certain age start to get. Thought rather than throwing more money at keeping that going just a bit longer, we'd see what else we could do. So we had a look around at the current pure EV scene. The new Leaf was out, the one that you test drove. You mentioned in a previous episode, the 40 kilowatt hour Leaf. Looked promising, had a much bigger range, but they're not big enough for our needs. In fact, when we get the whole family in our current Leaf, and of course the new one's about the same size, we just about squeeze in. It's already getting a bit uncomfortable. Start to add any extra luggage, and all bets are off. So we needed something with extra size and extra range, preferably even greater than the new Leaf range. So we did look at the Hyundai Ioniq, which I know you're quite bullish on. That's promising. That is a bit bigger, but not that much bigger. And it does have a higher range, but not that much higher. I mean, they claim 174 miles, and I know you say that you can probably push it even more than that if you drive very economically, which is really impressive given it's only a 28 kilowatt hour battery. But still, it's not quite enough to meet our needs on both the size and the range front. And looks like, well, there's been the promise of a bigger battery version coming for a while, but it's still not here yet. So that's one to keep an eye on for the future, perhaps. So other than going for the really high-end cars like some of the bigger Teslas, our only options seem to be a plug-in hybrid. And the obvious option was the Mitsubishi Outlander PHEV or PHEV. Never quite sure if anyone actually pronounces it that way. And if they do, does that make me a PHEVer now? I don't know, but that's a question for another time. So we got the Outlander. Overall, I'm happy with it. Don't regret the choice, but have learned a few things now that I'm an owner that I can have a bit of a rant about.
Go on. Well, it's better than a diesel. Let's be honest. I know I've been maybe slightly too negative about hybrids in one of the previous episodes, but I was trying to make a point, about the technology being outdated. It's not about the people. But yeah, please, because I've never test driven actually Outlander. So tell us what you think.
So actually, starting with the test drive, I did take it for a test drive, obviously before we bought it. It'd be a bit silly to take it for a test drive afterwards, but there you go. And the first thing that struck me was, even though it's a much bigger car, the feel of it, especially pulling away with that initial torque, was so similar to the Leaf that I was actually like blown away all over again. So that first experience when you first get in a car like the Leaf and you experience that initial torque, you think, wow, this is so much different to what I've been used to. And I was expecting something so much more sluggish from a car that size, but it was about the same, which was actually really nice, really surprising.
It's the famous EV grin that everyone's talking about.
Exactly. But I've been an owner of an EV for over 2 years now, so to experience it again was quite interesting. And to continue some of the positive things about the car before I get into the actual rant, and these are things specifically to counter some of your points from your rant, to say why this is a little bit different. So first of all, it supports fast charging. So most plugins don't, but this one does. I think it's one of the few, or perhaps the only one that does. So that can be useful. And it has a number of different modes to say whether you want it to be in pure EV mode, so you can actually drive it as a pure electric car. It has something called save mode, which you use particularly if you're driving on a motorway, and you want it to be charging the battery with regenerative braking, but not actually using the electric motor as part of the driving. So running on pure petrol for driving, but still charging the electric motor.
They missed the mark. They should have called it self-charging hybrid mode.
Well, it does have a charging mode as well, which I suppose is that. And this is one of the things that I think you mentioned in your rant, that this is how hybrids should work. That the petrol engine should just be there for charging the electric battery. It's not quite that, but it will charge the battery from the petrol engine, even if you're not running, if you're stopped. Obviously, the engine will be running, but you're not driving. And you can use it while you're driving. Again, perhaps we're on a motorway, and you just want to top up the battery. And obviously, it's going to be less efficient to do that than to just drive on petrol, but not significantly so. So it is something you can do from time to time. So that's a nice feature as well. So it's got those 3 modes. Now the rant starts. It turns out none of those modes are quite what they seem. First of all, the pure EV mode. Every dealer that I spoke to said, yeah, pure EV. Actually, when you get in and actually start driving, you realize it's not pure EV, it's more EV priority. So it will use the electric motor as much as it can, but then it will still use the petrol motor to augment it, just less than it would otherwise. So it's not exactly what you want from an EV mode. If you want EV, then you want EV. So a bit disappointed about that. Still, it's nice to have it there. The save mode, well, as far as I can tell, it does actually do what it advertises to do, to not use the electric motor, just the petrol engine, but to be recharging the battery from regenerative braking. What I found was, though, it actually doesn't charge very much. So I don't know whether this is the case with all hybrids, that what you actually get back from the regenerative braking is very little. But it just seems to be a lot less than I've noticed from the regenerative braking on the Leaf. I'm not quite sure what the reason for that is, but
well, I think it's the same reason why it's slower to charge on the rapid charger. It's just a smaller battery, so smaller voltages.
Yeah, so that was a bit disappointing as well. Excuse me. But nonetheless, it is useful. And the charge mode, well, that one does seem to work as advertised, except that the dealers told me that it was actually more, at least as efficient to use that than to run on petrol. But a little bit of searching afterwards disabused me of that notion. So there is a cost associated with that. And it turns out that the main reason that the mode exists is to make up for another shortcoming, which is that because it has a smaller petrol engine, I think it's a 2-litre engine, which for a car this size is a little bit underpowered. It can struggle a bit on pure petrol, particularly going up hills. So they recommend that if you're about to go up a big hill and you don't have any battery, it's worth stopping for a while, using the charge mode to charge up the battery, and then use the hybrid drivetrain to actually power you up the hill. So that actually seems more of a shortcoming than a feature when you think of it that way.
Yeah, interesting, because you would think a car this size would be designed to actually go up a steep hill. It's supposed to be SUV, right?
Well, exactly. And when you got the electric motor and the petrol engine working together, it does quite nicely, and it is 4-wheel drive. So you get quite a lot of power when they're working together, which is what you would want. But because the battery is so small, it's on a longer journey, you're going to run out very quickly. And because the save mode doesn't work as well as you would hope, that's more often the case than you would like. And I experienced that right on the first day. Ended up going up quite a steep hill. The battery was dead, and it struggled. I mean, it got us there, but it did struggle, which is not really what you want on a car at that level.
I presume it's automatic. Sorry to interrupt you, but can you still do? Most automatics have an ability to control the gears manually still. So can you just like shift it down and let it kind of get more grunt?
It is automatic. I'm not off the top of my head aware of the ability to put it into specific gear ratios. Don't remember anything on the stick is very similar to the one in the Leaf actually. So it's just a drive-by-wire selector rather than a manual. I was going to say gear stick, but you know what I mean. So I don't know the answer to that, and I'm not sure that would help. I mean, it is working, and it is putting itself effectively at a lower ratio to get up the hill because it needs to. It's the fact that it needs to that's the problem, I think. It's not a showstopper, and I know the showstoppers. I'm still happy with it overall. But it's just a few things that weren't quite as I'd expected beforehand when going in. A couple other things which are not really specific to this car, but maybe they're slightly worse. So one thing that annoys me about the Leaf, and actually every EV that I have tried, which is not many, but they all seem to have this same shortcoming, which is that to make full use of it, you really want that regenerative braking to be working all the time. But you have to specifically put it into that mode every time you start driving. So it's very easy to forget, and you're just not getting, and particularly on the Leaf where it is actually more effective, you're not getting that benefit back, which you're getting almost for free. It's just being thrown away because you have to specifically select this mode. There's no way to make it the default. So the Outlander takes it up a level, because not only do you have to put it into drive and then do a different motion to put it into regenerative braking mode, there's actually 5 regenerative braking modes, B1 to B5, and it puts it into B3 by default. You then got paddles behind the steering wheel to move the mode up and down. So you then have to pull the left paddle up twice to put it into B5, which is what I always want. Which means every time I get into the car, I've got to put it into drive, put it into regenerative braking mode, which is B3, and then use the paddles twice to put it into B5. It's actually more fiddly than a manual car at this point. And it's very easy to forget. So I'll often have driven some distance and realize I've not been making use of regenerative braking. And yet even at B5, it's actually not that effective. So I don't even know why the lower modes are even there. Personally, I don't really notice much difference when using the regenerative braking mode or not. I think just because I got used to it, because it's what I always use. But I know some people, when they first drive an EV, they're a bit put off by how it doesn't coast when you're on regenerative braking mode. So I can sort of understand why it's not the default when you first get in, but I think it should always be able to make it the default, I think, or at least make it easier to get into that mode. I don't know what you think about that.
Well, most of the petrol cars, manuals, as soon as you take your foot off the accelerator, it will just slow down, unless you're going down the hill. Automatics, it kind of depends on the car, but in my experience, similar thing. It will try to keep the speed initially, and then if you don't do anything, it will just taper off, and it will start slowing down. It's a safety feature, basically. The Teslas have quite a big amount of regenerative braking, or at least the ones that I drove. Admittedly, that was a couple of years ago, and I'm sure things have changed. And that was a Model S, so I don't have experience with Model 3 or X. The new Nissan Leaf has a one-pedal driving mode, which I actually loved. And they tell you specifically not to engage it in like urban scenarios, but I actually did find it more intuitive. Maybe because I've been used to B mode which is the higher regenerative braking mode on our Leafs, on the old generation Leafs. Hyundai Ioniq had a similar arrangement where it had paddles behind the steering wheel, and it also had 3 or 4 modes, like a leisurely mode, sports mode, and general mode, and whatever, which would have different levels of acceleration and deceleration. I'm not sure if it had any kind of one pedal driving mode. But generally, cars that have some sort of a one-pedal driving mode, which would be Tesla or the new Leaf, they do have a pretty aggressive regenerative braking. But I think the whole the downfall, or not downfall, but the shortfall of the of hybrids is that, or PHEVs, is that they generally have a very small battery, and the sizes haven't actually gotten bigger in the last year or so. You would expect them to actually do get bigger, but they just don't seem to be. They don't seem to be big. So just from a pure sort of physics point of view, in order to charge a battery quickly, you need more cells, and cells are usually distributed in little bundles or bunches, and the voltage and amperage that generator can generate will have to kind of match the battery pack size. So you can't really flood the battery with electricity when you're going down the hill. So there has to be a limit, basically, and I'm sure that's why you don't see as aggressive regenerative braking as you would on a Leaf, say. And likewise, if you have something like a Tesla with a even 75 kilowatt hour battery pack that has a bigger potential for electricity to go back in, because if you go down the hill in an electric car, the generator can actually generate quite a bit of power, and you have to kind of flock it somewhere. So I think that's the reason behind it. It's the same reason, like you mentioned, Outlander specifically has the rapid charger port, but it's unable to actually charge properly rapidly. The owners have quite often have been blocking the chargers, charging the Outlanders for half an hour or longer, and it's got a tiny battery, and it used to be a big sticking point for like plenty of people got angry because they wanted to charge their pure EVs, and when you turned up at the charger, it was blocked by Outlander plugged into CHAdeMO, which would have been much better off if you're there for half an hour or longer. You would have been much better off plugging it into a regular 7 kilowatt-hour outlet. I think the reason PHEV owners have done that is because the cars weren't sold with a cable, so you couldn't plug it in basically. Whereas the rapid chargers got already the cable attached, so you can just plug it in without having to carry your own cable. But I'm not sure what. At least that's the experience that I've heard about. I'm not sure what is the truth these days, because you bought your cars new, right?
Yes, it's a 2018 model, so that's just under a year old when we bought it.
Did you get a cable, Type 2 cable with it?
I did, yes. So that wasn't the problem. And I'll get onto the battery and charging in a moment. Just want to go back to what you were saying about the new Leaf with the what's it called? The
one pedal drive.
One pedal drive mode. Because I've since you had a test drive, I've had a chance to turn over a new Leaf as well, and I have to say I really love that feature as well. It took a couple of minutes to get used to it. It's a little bit unnatural to begin with, but very quickly, especially if you've been driving a Leaf with the B mode already, it just feels very natural. And I don't know why you would want to do it any other way after you've been driving it for a while.
And there is a setting in the settings that actually allows you to enable it permanently. So every time you turn on the car, by default it will turn it off between the drives, but you can turn it back on. So it will be a default, which is like the perfect thing.
Exactly. Yes, and that was really my main rant. Not that the modes exist, and especially when you do have like different driving styles, you want a different mode for a different style. But not being able to select the default, and the default not being the most economical, is the thing that really gets me. Because the whole point for most people of having an electric car is to be more economical. So that ran over.
Well, I would argue that the whole point of PHEVs having the electric motor, especially, is for them to be more economical and to lower the average emission so that they can sell them, basically. Because that's the reason they worked in a plug and the hybrid thing. Interesting.
So the battery. So yes, it has a smaller battery. I hadn't really made the connection before because I realised that the size of the battery, because actually it's not a single thing, it's a number of cells. And as you say, the more cells you have, the faster you can charge them, because you're effectively charging in parallel. So I appreciated that from a normal charging perspective, but for some reason I had made the connection with the regenerative braking charging. But actually, obviously, it's basically the same thing. So that does make sense. What you were saying about fast charging, it does make a big difference, because for all the same reasons, charging with your domestic charging point, even if you have the 7 kilowatt hour one, it still takes a long time, like many hours. So if you can fully charge it in half an hour, that's still a win for all the same reasons that's a win for any electric vehicle. And also, you shouldn't do it all the time. I have another story about charging stations, which maybe we'll get onto, but going back to the battery. So it is bigger than certainly most hybrids, and I think bigger than most plug-in hybrids even. And they say that you should get about 30 miles on pure EV range. And, of course, we know that the claimed figures are, always about, 30%, 40% higher than you actually get on the roads. So I wasn't expecting 30 miles. But so one of the things that we use our car for is for the school run. School is about 5 miles away. So it's a 10-mile round trip. But we're usually out of battery before we get back. So on those conditions, we have less than 10-mile range. So it's better than a normal hybrid, but it's still a bit disappointing. And the worst part is, we're not even using pure EV mode, partly because there is no pure EV mode, only EV priority, but we're not even using that. We're just using the normal, however it likes to distribute it. It's mostly low speed, so I'd imagine it's mostly EV, but we could definitely see the petrol engine kicking in. So it's not even just pure EV, and we've got less than 10 miles range. So that's probably the most disappointing aspect about the car. Now, to be fair, the terrain around here is not the best for getting the most efficient use of your electric vehicle. There's lots of hills. They're not really steep hills, but they're definitely there, and lots of very tight bends and lots of traffic. So all factors that will really reduce your range. But still, I had expected to get a lot more out of this. So I think that's about the end of my rant for now.
Interesting, because I think so. When I got my Leaf, the Ecotricity chargers in the UK, which are the chargers on the motorway stations, rapid chargers or fast chargers, as some people call them, or was it quick chargers? There's so many different names. I call them rapid chargers because they're level 4 or whatever. They used to be free, and there was quite a lot of outlander drivers, because obviously that was the only car with the shadow mode plug that would stop every 10 miles and plug it in, and they were trying to do free journeys that way on pure electric mode. And when I talked to them, the few of them that weren't very aggressive, they would always claim that this car is essentially an EV, which I was always dubious about, because why would you buy a hybrid if you want an EV? But their claim was always that, I can do 20 odd miles on this, and and it can drive in a pure EV mode, which, from what you're saying, sounds like almost truth, basically. With asterisks, basically.
Lots of asterisks. Like I say, overall, I don't regret getting it, because I still don't have a better option. There are bigger cars with bigger ranges being promised to come out, but it's still not clear when they're coming out. And I think the best option right now, possibly, more asterisks, may well be the Tesla Model Y, because I think that may actually start being available in reasonable numbers about the time that my 2-year PCP on the Outlander is up, and I'll be ready to go back in the market. So I deliberately chose a short period of time because I knew the market was moving quickly, and it's just a matter of time before we get a better option. So this is really just to tie me over.
Interesting.
And I think it's doing that job.
Yeah, the terrible, like, the state of the market currently is really horrible. I'm really disappointed. I've made an observation in one of the previous episodes, and since a couple of other people, including Robert Llewellyn and some other people on Twitter, have kind of made the same points as I have. And so I think I'm correct in thinking that the car manufacturers are not very eager to move on to EV or pure EV production. They still have, like I said on one of the previous episodes, they've invested sometimes billions into the drivetrains, and they just have to keep on churning them out. And also from a business perspective, they take the least path of the least resistance. So unless regulators force them to do it, they won't switch to pure EVs. It's just they do have the technology. It's just cheaper for them to develop a PHEV or self-charging hybrid, which is essentially just a hybrid, 20-year-old hybrid with not even a slightly bigger battery. It's just they just took a plug away because there's no longer, and there used to be an incentive, government incentive for plug-in hybrids, and since most governments took that away, thinking, oh yeah, well, this will force people to actually, or companies to produce pure EVs, but actually the opposite has happened. They just took the plugs away out of the cars, which is just terrible. So I'm deeply disappointed with car manufacturers, but that's not to be like, it's not a surprise if you think about it. If I'm trying to be an optimist, but the cynical side of the world just churns up the way up for me.
I don't disagree with your pessimism, but I do think that market pressures are building such that they will have to make that switch, and they are preparing for it. They are trying to switch things over. And as you've observed, these things take time. You really have to plan these things at least 5, more like 10 years ahead. And 5 to 10 years ago, obviously the future was a bit less predictable. So it's always difficult to make predictions, especially about the future.
We're on a good track, but you would kind of hope things would have turned out better. Like, I'm deeply disappointed in companies like Hyundai. The limited production of Hyundai Kona or Kia Niro is just unforgivable. Like, it's just, the demand is there. So I had some people commenting on Facebook saying, let's just the market work its way out, and that's just not true. That's just pure bollocks. As far as I'm concerned, the demand is there. I would, if I could go to a Hyundai dealership today and drop, say, £5,000 deposit and get my car in even 2 months, I would have done that. But because I would have to wait over a year to get it, or not get it at all, because who knows? That's just unforgettable. If you're manufacturing an EV, make batteries yourself. It's just I don't understand. Like, they do manufacture their own drivetrains, and battery essentially in an EV. I don't want to go into a technical rant again, but the battery in an EV is essentially part of the drivetrain. It's not it's not a tank. Battery is a bit more complicated than a petrol tank, much more complicated. And it's literally a part of the drivetrain. If you can actually argue that the actual electric motor in an EV is less important than a battery. It's far easier to manufacture one, and there's so many different architectures and so many different designs. There's loads of videos about it on YouTube, and loads of papers about it if one wants to actually educate themselves. But not having your own battery manufacturing, or even secure battery, most of these companies actually buy batteries from LG Chem, and LG Chem actually decided to put up the prices and lower the supply. Who knows why? I don't know. Maybe they're just struggling themselves. There's a big demand. They're obviously the ones that were chosen by all these companies. I think, I'm not sure about I-Pace and Jaguar, but I'm pretty sure Hyundai and Kia are using LG Chem. And there's loads of more manufacturers out in the world. I think Tesla has went the correct way about it. They knew that they have to build their own battery supply, and that's the only correct way about it. Even Nissan, who's recently sold their own EV battery production to some other company, and they're sourcing batteries from somebody else, they lower the production yields as well. It's the same reason. It's just I just don't understand why this just does not compute. I don't know if you have any ideas, but it's just
Well, I don't disagree with you, and I'm definitely no expert in this area, but I do have a slightly different perspective, and that is that whichever way you look at it, batteries are the bottleneck in terms of technology, in terms of sourcing the raw materials, in terms of getting the people who have sufficient knowledge and talent to actually work on these things. It's really at the leading edge of that particular field. what you really need to be is a specialist in building advanced batteries that happens to also be able to build cars. And I think that's how Tesla got their formula right, because they focused on the battery first, and then I wouldn't say that the cars themselves were an afterthought, but it was really a secondary thing. I mean, they have Elon has other companies that do other things with batteries and charging, and that's the bigger area. So I think to expect a traditional car manufacturer to suddenly become an expert in a completely different field is, I think it's asking a bit much in the short term. So I can see why they have to look elsewhere to get that part of the technology in. Once you've got the battery in, the rest of the car, it's, well, as you discussed in the previous episode, it's, relatively speaking, vastly simpler, much simpler than a traditional ICE car. So the battery is the only thing that really they need the extra expertise for, and they don't really have that in-house for the most part. And getting the competitive advantage from that, well, I think that's something that's going to play out and is playing out with Tesla, but the market's not quite big enough for that to be the sole force at the moment, I think.
First question I asked her was, do you ever think about electric cars? Sit down.
Yeah, I'm surprised the major manufacturers are not. I think BMW and VW have invested loads of money and have, so far just been talking quite a lot about EVs, because 2020 is supposed to be the year of the EVs, and we're supposed to see affordable EVs, whatever that's supposed to mean, from VW in 2020, which I'm actually quite excited about. The Honda Urban or e-Urban, whatever they call it, the little car that has a very short range. I think it's like 150, 60 miles, but it looks very cute. It's not a car that you would buy having 3 kids, but unless you just want to buy it for yourself as a sort of, go-kart. But I'm very excited about that car. And there's interestingly, there are companies out there that do invest loads of money into battery manufacturing processes, but they're not, at least at the moment, they're not car manufacturers. We have, companies like Samsung. Actually, I think they do manufacture, or LG used to manufacture cars. I'm not sure about Samsung. They probably do, because they manufacture everything. Because it's a group of corporations. It's not just sharing the same trademark. It's not or name. It's not one giant company. Dyson has bought a car manufacturing, a battery manufacturing company. Who knows what they're doing? So obviously they're keeping everything under wraps until it's ready. Apple has its own battery. I don't think they manufacture them, but they have their own people in house who specialize in that. So they know what they're putting in their tech. And I'm sure the same is true for a couple of other companies that I don't know about. But I haven't heard about a major car manufacturer other than Tesla and VW and BMW actually, who've decided to do anything about it. But anyway, let's talk about something a bit more pleasant, I should say.
Well, actually, just to drag that part of the conversation out just a little bit more. First of all, looking at the economics of the situation. So you mentioned companies like Apple and Samsung having their own in-house battery technology, even if they're not building them themselves, or in the case of Apple. But for them, it makes a lot of sense because they're putting them to phones and other mobile devices that they're selling in the billions. Which car manufacturer is selling cars in the billions right now? It's a tiny market, particularly for the traditional car manufacturers. And of course, that's part of the problem. And it's a chicken and egg. It's going to be tiny until they actually expand it themselves. But it does mean that they've got to put a big investment up front on something that's not going to pay off for many years to come. And yes, they will have to do it, and some are. But I can also see why they're slow to do it. Just looking at it from the perspective of a business trying to keep its profits up. So I can see why that's slow, and it is frustrating, but it is going to be the bottleneck. But turning it around to something a bit more positive, just to pick up on the point you mentioned a moment ago, that 2020 is meant to be the year of the EV, and I think it will be, not because of battery technology. I think that's going to be a dependency of how it plays out beyond. But 2020, I think, is going to be a golden year because, well, we're already seeing decent EVs in reasonable numbers on the second-hand market. So they're filtering down to sort of most everyday people can afford one, at least as a second car. So the ones on the second-hand market right now are not sufficient for most people for an only car. Obviously, many people do have them as an only car, but for people, say, in my position, it's not been sufficient. But the cars on the new market this year, we're starting to see those much bigger ranges. They're going to be coming onto the market in increasing numbers through this year and into next year. And by the end of next year, we'll start to see that some of those starting to arrive on the second-hand market, because there's always a few one-year-old cars coming on the second-hand market. That's enough of a markdown that you get another sort of tranche of people able to afford them. I would even say maybe 2021 is going to be the real peak, because that's when it's going to get down to again, those prices that everyone can afford, and also have a range that is going to be enough for a great many more people to have as a sole car. I think the biggest thing we still need to get is the bigger cars, which has been the problem for me, and is going to be the problem for anyone with not a small family, shall we say? So
I think it's a problem. Like there are bigger cars like Tesla Model S and X out there, but they're obviously out of your price range.
Exactly. So I'm talking about everyday prices. I mean, they're still going to be expensive, but I mean, the thing I found when I got my 24 kilowatt hour Leaf 2 years ago was I bought it secondhand. It was just under 2 years old, and it was not the most expensive car I bought, but it wasn't the cheapest either. Still cost a lot of money, but I managed to get a good deal on an interest-free credit over 3 years deal. And what I was paying in monthly payments was about the same as I'd previously been paying for diesel on my other car. And while they didn't completely go away, because I still use the other car a bit, and obviously do still pay for electricity, it was, to a first approximation, almost a free car. Certainly a very good value proposition when you look at the total cost of ownership, even over 2 or 3 years. And I think that economy is going to be becoming more and more realistic for more and more people in more and more situations. And it's just going to be those bigger cars, the current big EV prices. That's definitely well out of most people's range for many years. But as things like the Model Y come out, if it actually follows through, that could actually get down to everyday range. And more importantly, that's going to spur that market for other manufacturers to say, actually, we've got to do this as well. Again, that may take more years because they're so slow, but hopefully at this point, they do have other alternatives waiting in the wings, and we'll be able to roll them out a little bit faster than they have done.
The optimist in me hopes, because obviously things like Audi e-tron and Jaguar I-Pace, the first generation cars are manufactured by somebody who's never actually manufactured a pure EV on a large scale. They had some in the 70s and whatever, but let's not talk about those because that's a completely different technology. But I do hope that let's just say though those cars are actually not selling that well. Like there's a huge demand, but they're very expensive, relatively expensive, so they're obviously not selling in as great numbers as for Jaguar, say E-Pace, which is third or fourth of the price of I-Pace. And frankly, I could, because when I bought my Leaf new, it would probably cost as much as the Jaguar E-Pace, or F-Pace, whatever the SUV thing. So I could have bought that instead, basically. And if you think about Jaguar I-Pace, that costs nearly £70,000. That's like 3 times the price. But just going back to this to battery manufacturing, the one of the many reasons why Tesla has done the right thing, and VW has to do the same thing in order to bring the cars for the masses, like it is in their mission statement, EV cars in this case, is that when you manufacture the cells yourself, you're lowering the price per kilowatt hour massively. And Tesla's already reduced the price just immensely per kilowatt hour, and that's the only way. If you're buying it from somebody like LG Chem, yes, you sign a contract with them for a number of years, but there's always clauses in contract that allow them to put up the prices, which is exactly what they've done. So I think that this is where there's a difference. And obviously, for an EV, you're manufacturing so much more in terms of the volume and number of cells compared to your laptop or your phone. It's a completely different, engineering problem. So relying on somebody who used to manufacture loads of cells for phones like LG Chem is just not exactly the right approach. Actually, speaking of affordable cars and Nissan's cars, or major manufacturers, should I say, E-Plus actually came officially on sale. You can order one online starting this week, I think, which is the Nissan Leafs 64 kilowatt hour version. I think the entry price is about £35,000. It can do, in theory, 230 miles. Which sounds interesting, but if you think about it, Model 3 is supposed to come out in the UK in the next few months, and I'm sure initially it will be performance, versions that are very expensive, but the sort of the lower end of the of Teslas is going to be about £36,000 as well. So I wonder how that compares, given the fact that Tesla obviously has so much. I don't know how to explain it, but and this will tie in with the next thing I'm going to talk about. The trips in a Tesla, because you obviously have to stop and charge, are so much more pleasant than, say, in an EV like the Leaf that I own. In the Leaf, I have to search for the next stop and kind of plan ahead, one stop at a time usually. I don't like to plan too many stops ahead because you don't know how the dynamic of the situation is going to turn out. If the charge is going to be blocked, if you're going to go further because you've underestimated or overestimated your range, and so on. But in a Tesla, you just basically get in and you say, I want to go from here to Oslo in Norway, say, just for the sake of the example. And it will know automatically which one of the superchargers are available on the way, where I should stop, if there's any available, because it could be fully booked. And you just turn up, plug it in, wait, unplug, and carry on. There's no cards to swipe. There's no, apps to have on your phone. None of that rubbish. And if you have to decide between two cars that have a similar range, I think Tesla Model 3 is slightly bigger, but not massively bigger than a Leaf. I think it's got a bigger boot. Certainly has more power and looks much better. Has the ability to do over software updates, so it will get better over time. And let's not forget about the self-driving capability, which they've recently announced as well. I'm tying in another point on our list of subjects very nicely. For the same or similar price, I think Tesla is just a no-brainer. Especially now with Model 3, other people in Europe have reported that sometimes they just wait 7 days between the time they've ordered the car and the time they've received it, because they just, they put loads of them on the boat, they flock them into the country. It's sitting somewhere in the in a parking space, and they just, once you've ordered one and configured it, chances are they have 10 of them sitting somewhere, and they, it's just the time it takes for that car to be shipped to where you are, and you have it. Whereas I had to wait 2 months for my Nissan Leaf when I ordered it new. There were some delays because of some manufacturing issues and all that. They're all manufactured to order, essentially. Whereas what Tesla does is, they've greatly simplified the configurations, or the number of possible configurations, and they just manufacture the most typical one. Loads of options are done in software, so you can just do that, after the manufacturing has been completed. And I just find it hard to think about getting a Leaf at the moment, or any other car for that matter, especially if Model 3 enters the UK market. Like I've mentioned before, something like a Hyundai Kona or a Kia e-Niro would be perfect, because they have a 300 plus mile ranges. But it's just, I don't know, I'm just so unhappy about the way these manufacturers are treating their customers or potential customers. What do you think about that?
Overall, I would agree. It's news to me that people are getting their Model 3s more quickly now. The last I'd heard that there were still long waiting lists, especially if you're signing up now. So that's positive. But there have been frequent problems with Tesla's supply and their predictions about supply, and their CEO going off on different flights of fantasy. So they have been a bit unpredictable. But when they do execute, they do seem to execute really well. So, yeah, even if it's just that going to Tesla is like a token thing to say, I'm not going to give my custom to the manufacturers, and I'm not taking this seriously. If enough people do that, then that's going to be a factor that's going to make the rest of the manufacturers listen. Well, we can't have a world where there's only one manufacturer making the cars that everyone wants, because that's not going to be sustainable. So we do need everyone else to also be making decent electric cars. And at the moment, Tesla do seem to be making the best, and they're starting to make them more affordable. Again, it's going to take a while for that to really trickle down, but it is happening. And to say, I'm personally more interested in the Model Y at this point, which doesn't seem to be looking like it's going to be much more expensive than the Model 3. It's just going to be another wait.
Yeah, I think it's just going to be a couple more thousand, 10% more basically, which is, reasonable for a car that's slightly bigger and can seat 2 or 3 more people. It essentially has more, I think, another row or an option to have another row of seats.
Right, but that exactly. So that might be a comparatively small extra size, but it's that extra size that passes a certain threshold that suddenly makes it viable for a lot more people, and only perhaps 10% more. I think that's a real game changer. That's going to reshape the market again, I think, is my prediction.
Yeah, I do agree. It's SUVs and cars that size are very popular, especially amongst sort of middle class parents. Even if somebody has one child, they all of a sudden want to have a bigger car, and that and something like Model 3 might not necessarily hit the sweet spot. Although I think it's these cars are fine, but for some reason people seem to choose bigger cars for one reason or another.
There's a whole other rant we could go on. Maybe we will another time, about whether even something like the Leaf is too big for smaller families, single people, couples. There are smaller options, but they're not particularly well received in the market, I think, overall. But maybe we do need to be moving towards a world where we have more options available to us rather than just the single car that we own. But that's definitely a conversation for another time, I think.
We've recently done a trip to New Forest for the Easter weekend or Easter bank holiday, and that's about 160-mile trip one way, which is obviously slightly over the range of a 30 kilowatt-hour Leaf, which in practice can do about 100 miles on a single charge without having to stop. And I can arrive with in the warm weather with about 100 miles done with few miles to spare, which is not usually good enough to go to a next charging station, but it's good enough to go somewhere and ask them to plug into a 3-pin socket if necessary. The sort of the area of Southampton and New Forest is not exactly rich with the charging options. So I've planned it so that it was just 40-50 mile journey, which in a holiday traffic takes about 2 hours anyway. So that's kind of a limit of my bladder range. I'm peckish after 2 hours and I want to have some sort of a snack or just rest. So we went to a lovely place near Chichester, which is a camping ground, and they have 2 rapid chargers. I kid you not. It's a camping ground, and they have 2 rapid chargers, both Pollard rapid chargers. So we had a cake and coffee there, and then we just carried on to for another 45 minutes to another rapid charger in Holiday Inn, because we just wanted to have some bigger food. Again, it was a long trip because of the holiday traffic. We've arrived to a nice hotel in New Forest. New Forest is a very lovely area in the UK, for those who don't know, with free roaming horses and donkeys and all sorts of animals. It's a quite unique area. In terms of the terrain, and if you want to go outdoors and walk for miles without having to cross a road, it's a place to go to. And that's essentially what I wanted to do over the Easter holiday. We've asked at the place we were staying at if we can plug in. They didn't have a charger, but I just asked them if I can use the outside socket, and they have quite a few of those sort of maintenance sockets outside. The weatherproof 3-pin sockets where you plug in your whatever utility, and so we were able to top up that way. And there is it turns out that there is a very nice hotel in New Forest as well with a rapid charger about 17 miles away from where we were staying. So I took that that trip as well, and we've charged there as well. It seems to be quite popular because it's, again, the only rapid charger in about 40-mile radius. And we obviously we stayed there for dinner. So for those again who don't know, in the UK, there's BP has bought a Polar network, which is a rapid charge network or charge network, because they manufacture chargers for your house and sort of smaller posts as well as the rapid chargers now, and they seem to be putting them everywhere. It's an amazing piece of kit. It looks much nicer than the old school DBT chargers that we used to have at the petrol stations. It charges very fast, and they seem to just pop up randomly at businesses. Because I think the deal is, if you're a sort of medium-sized business, you can approach BP and you can say, okay, well, I have this business, I have so many people, churning through. Can I have a rapid charger, please? And I don't know what the business arrangements, but from what I've heard unofficially from people, you cover some of the basic costs, but essentially you get it for free. So if you have a business that that has people coming through, because it's what BP is doing basically is trying to build up the network. So if they can put these chargers everywhere, they will do so, because they can then claim you are no longer stinky British petroleum. Forget about all the instances of spilled oil that we have to fight with. We're now all this this green and sustainable network of electric car rapid chargers, which I'm all for. I don't deny it. We had a lovely time in New Forest, and I don't know what else to report on that trip, other than if you do have an EV and you're or you have two cars and you're not sure if you should take your EV because the range is such that you might not have anywhere to charge, ask the place where you're going to be staying if you can use the 3-pin socket. In our case, from 0 to full, which is never the case because you never arrive with completely empty, or not very often anyway. In theory, it should take about 10 hours to charge the full using the 3-pin socket. But if you're staying somewhere for holidays and you just want to top up, every day and drive around, asking the hotel to use a 3-pin socket, most of them will say yes. What's going to happen usually is if you ask at the reception, they'll probably don't know what you're talking about, or they'll think you want to top up your 12-volt battery in a car. But I usually do is have a chat, and I ask them, make sure with your clear this with your manager. So they usually just come back to me after an hour or so, and usually the answer is yes. I had problems with smaller businesses in the past, B&Bs and such, who would flatly deny it for health and safety reasons. There was actually a place I stayed in a couple of months ago, where the owner of the business told me upon arrival that no, I cannot run my cable and charge the car from the 3-pin socket. And by the way, you're the only person staying, but no, for health and safety reason, we cannot allow you to plug in, which is I just found ridiculous. Health and safety, but there's nobody else staying around. Does not compute.
Okay, well,
but overall, the trip went very well, and like I said, I had to stop twice instead of once on the way, but we got there, we got back, and you can do this in a 30 kilowatt-hour Leaf.
So my takeaway from that story is that while the charging infrastructure does have a long way to go, it is getting better, and there are other alternate opportunities if you're a little bit creative, and it may surprise you.
Indeed. I would have taken completely different routes a couple of years ago if I had to do the same thing. So I would have to, because we didn't take the motorways all the way, because I knew motorways are going to be even worse in terms of the traffic. So I just took, A roads, which in the UK are usually single carriageways, but sometimes they're dual carriageways as well. So you're going still pretty fast. It's not slow. You're not taking B roads, and there was plenty of that as well, connecting in between the different A roads, but it was generally pretty fast. But it was a nice day. It was our holiday, so I did choose to stop more often than perhaps I should have. And it's odd because the Polar chargers are actually charging less per kilowatt hour than our home suppliers. So technically, it's actually cheaper to charge using those particular chargers than charging at home, which is good. Obviously it's free when you're in a hotel and they just allow you to plug into the 3-pin socket, because the chances are that the light in hallway is going to consume more power during the day than your car will. But it was overall a very, very nice trip, and it is purely doable in a Leaf if you don't have any other cars. I always tell people, just be a bit more creative about it, and it takes a bit more effort, but so does going in a petrol car. If you're going to a place in the middle of nowhere, you still have to find a petrol station.
Yeah, I nearly got caught out going into Wales last year in my petrol or diesel car. We went much longer than expected between petrol stations and nearly ran out. So it does happen.
Yeah, well, Wales is an interesting place when it comes to to driving. But sorry, go on.
I was just going to relate my recent story of driving in the Leaf. Went to Folkestone, just not far away. It's just 52 miles from here. So I had to stop at least once to charge. In practice, it's safer to stop twice. What I found was there's a service station near Folkestone. And I don't know if this is still the case, but it was at that time. It's just an Ecotricity charger. And it was free. Wasn't actually charging any money for it, which, as you said, it used to be the case, but 2 or 3 years ago they changed so that though you do have to pay. They recently changed the way they charge money again recently, but this particular charger was giving out free electricity. So if you live in that area, then that's that could be quite handy. So presumably there are other cases like that. Maybe it's a glitch, or maybe it was deliberate. I don't know, but watch out for them.
I think they when they have problems connecting to the cloud, they default to the free, and they're very happy to default to free mode. And obviously, it kind of
just need a cellular blocker with you then.
Yeah, it goes in line with it goes in line with their mission statement, which is the sort of vegan friendly company. They do want to enable people to drive on renewables. It just makes sense for them to kind of do that. So thank you, folks, for listening to our episode, and please subscribe, give us the feedback on Facebook at facebook.com/takeitev or on Twitter at takeitev. And that's it for the episode 6. It's goodbye from me, and
it's goodbye from him.
Bye-bye.
Take it easy.